All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. We got lots to talk about today. We had a big meeting earlier this week on Wednesday between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump here in America. This was the sixth time Benjamin Netanyahu has traveled to America during Donald Trump's second term, which is just a mind-boggling number. And they focused mainly on Iran. So we're going to be talking all about what happened during that meeting, where negotiations stand as of this moment. We'll talk about the meeting that happened between U.S. and Iranian diplomats back last Friday, because we haven't really gotten a chance to talk about that. And we'll also try and think about where this may be going, because as we speak, there is a major military buildup still going on in the Middle East in preparation for a potential strike on Iran. So we'll talk about all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Maybe we should improve the liberty of our own country before we seek to do so abroad. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. The correct answer to this, of course, as it always is liberty. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify accounts and giving all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that as well. Let's get into the news of the day. We'll read first from this antiwar.com article, which just goes over the events of the past couple days. As I said in the intro, Benjamin Netanyahu visited America for the sixth time, and the meeting focused between Trump and Netanyahu largely on the issue of Iran. And we'll just, for context here, go over real quick where we are. We've had, for the past month roughly, major military tensions between the United States and Iran and Israel. And we've had Israel really trying to pressure Donald Trump and the United States into a direct confrontation with Iran and potentially a regime change operation, which has been Israel's goal for decades. So we'll get into this here. This is antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp from last night, just going over some of the statements made by Donald Trump over the past couple days. It says, quote, President Trump said Thursday that it would be, quote, very traumatic for Iran if Washington and Tehran don't reach a nuclear deal, echoing threats that he made last year in the lead up to the 12-day war. Quote, we have to make a deal with Iran. Otherwise, it's going to be very traumatic, very traumatic. I don't want that to happen, but we have to make a deal, Trump told reporters a day after holding talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Quote, we had a very good meeting yesterday with Bibi Netanyahu, and he understands, but it's ultimately up to me. If the deal isn't a very fair deal and a very good deal with Iran, it's going to be a very difficult time for them, Trump added. The U.S. president was then asked if there was a timeline for a deal and said, quote, I guess over the next month, they should agree very quickly. Let's just step back here real quick for context and just kind of lay out what's been going on here. We just last week on Friday had U.S. and Iranian diplomats meet in Oman for kind of preliminary talks about the nuclear enrichment of Iran. That is the main point of contention here between the United States and Israel and Iran. That is the main issue. Just as it was back in June in the 12-day war, this issue, regardless of what the administration has been saying, this issue has not been solved. This is still an issue of contention in the region. And this is what the talks on Friday in Oman were focused on. It was the nuclear enrichment capabilities of Iran. So let's just, again, point out here that the United States and Israel fundamentally, and this is something you need to remember, you need to understand this as we get into all the details here during this episode. The United States and Israel have fundamentally different goals when it comes to dealing with Iran. And they have fundamentally different interests. The interests of Israel when it comes to Iran are vastly different and not at all in the United States' interests. The United States' interest, their sole interest in dealing with Iran and making a deal with Iran, is the halting of their nuclear capabilities and not allowing Iran to make a nuclear weapon. That is the sole interest of the United States in these negotiations. And the United States is talking to the Iranians solely on this basis. These are talks that are strictly about the nuclear ability of Iran. Israel, on the other hand, has much broader terms. They have much more they want to see happen with the Iranian regime. Ultimately, they want the regime overthrown and toppled, and they want chaos in Iran. That's their big dream goal for Israel, is to see chaos in Iran and to see Iran completely destabilized and unable to threaten Israel. That's Israel's goal. This broader goal of seeing that happen involves not only the nuclear, which the United States and Israel would be on the same page on, but it also involves ballistic missile capabilities of Iran. It involves their proxies, and it involves their broader regional influence, which Israel would like to see brought down. They would like to see Iran lose all of their sway in the region, because that is against Israel's interest. This is not against America's interest. Actually, it's probably the opposite. What Israel is doing in the region is causing chaos. That is what's against America's interest, because America has bases all across the region. America has allies besides Israel all across the region, in the Gulf, with these rich oil countries. The United States has an interest in being friendly with these countries. And Israel causing chaos is not in the interest of the United States or the other Gulf allies. So that's the dynamic at play here. And the United States and Israel do fundamentally have different interests when it comes to Iran. Now, when they meet at the White House, like we just saw earlier this week, they like to put on a singular face. They like to not make it known that there are differences of opinion here. And they want to make it seem as if they are on the entirely same page and they have the exact same goals, because Israel, their entire strength in the region, is partially reliant on the fact that they can always fall back on the United States backing them up in all of their endeavors. In every major war they get into, they can rely on the United States to either jump in offensively to that war on their behalf or jump in and defend them when a retaliatory strike is coming. That's what their entire strength in the region is built upon. Now, let's just step back again a second and just remember, again, for context here, because if you haven't been following the past, really since October 7th, the past couple of years, then all of this kind of seems out of nowhere. You hear people asking, why are we doing this? What's our beef with Iran? And it really goes back to Israel's broader regional goals. This goes back decades. Israel, for decades, since really the beginning of the Netanyahu era in Israel, since the Likud party rose to power, Israel has had a full foreign policy doctrine of seeking regional dominance. They think the only way that they can be safe in the region, and the only way they can safely, without any pushback, expand their borders into Gaza and the West Bank first, and then into other areas like southern Lebanon and Syria, the Golan Heights. The only way they can do this without facing pushback is if they destabilize and topple all the other powerful regimes in the region. And for decades, they've systematically been able to do this with the help and really with the entire backing of the United States government. That's how they've been able to do this systematically. That's how Iraq was overthrown. It was because of a push of Israeli propaganda that got the United States involved in that war. That's how Libya got overthrown. That's how Gaddafi got overthrown. That was an Obama-backed, NATO-backed, really a coup, an unnatural uprising against Gaddafi. That's how Syria fell. That's how Assad fell the end of 2024. It was with pressure over a decade from United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, funding Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Al-Nusra Front in Syria. This is what's been going on. All the ways that these regimes have fallen is not natural. It's not just out of the blue. It's not a result of simple natural uprisings from the disgruntled populations of these countries. That's a small part of this, yes. That would be a lie to say otherwise. But the main reason, the main factor in all of these overthrown regimes is the United States, number one, and Israel backing rebel groups to overthrow these regimes, because it's in Israel's interest in the region, in their efforts to seek regional hegemony, to overthrow these powerful regimes that won't put up with them expanding their borders like this. That's the main goal here. And that carries over now into the modern conflicts that we see. Those happened over the past couple of decades. Now, the main enemy for Israel, the enemy that's stopping them from achieving their regional goals, the last stronghold really, is Iran. And that's why we see such a strong push from the Israel lobby in America, from their figures in the media, from the lobbyists in D.C., and from their politicians that the lobbyists buy off in D.C. That's why we see such a strong propaganda push, really since the beginning of this Trump term, to get a war in Iran. That's why we see people like Mark Levin pushing so strongly for a full-blown regime change effort in Iran. That's why we see Lindsey Graham meeting with Trump almost on a daily basis to push for the overthrow of the Ayatollah. This is the operation here. It's been a process over decades to build the United States up to overthrow Iran on behalf of Israel so Israel can achieve its regional dominance. So that's what we're seeing here. And since October 7th, that's the background context of the region over decades. Since October 7th, Israel saw October 7th as their excuse to go forward with everything in one foul swoop. That's what they've been doing since October 7th. They bombed a number of countries since October 7th, besides just Gaza. Yeah, of course, they bombed Gaza. They've killed over almost 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. They're also moving towards an official annexation of the West Bank. They've unofficially occupied the West Bank for decades at this point, but they're looking to move forward towards a official annexation of the land. They bombed Damascus a couple months ago. They bombed Damascus in Syria instantly after Assad fell at the end of 2024. They bombed airports, they bombed military facilities, and they bombed them a couple months ago. They bombed Qatar back at the end of the summer to assassinate the negotiation team of Hamas to try and make it so that a deal could not be brokered with Hamas, because they did not want a deal like we're seeing right now to happen in Gaza. And by the way, that deal is fraudulent, but we don't have to get into that. We saw them bomb the Houthis in Yemen. We've seen them bomb Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've been on, and we of course saw them bomb Iran back in June. They've had a regional war that they've been conducting since October 7th because they saw October 7th as an excuse and as an opportunity, a pretext to go forward with their wider regional goals with less pushback because it seems justified after October 7th. This is the context which this conflict now exists within. And what we're seeing now, we don't know if there's going to be more negotiations now with Iran. There was no word of that. But what we see now is Trump seemingly does not want to get into a war here. Trump seems to be looking to make some sort of a deal. And we're all forgetting here, even if, let's just say for a second, that Trump makes a deal with Iran. Great. Let's make a deal with Iran. I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. That would be great. If we can make a deal, we can broker a deal to make it so that they can't acquire a nuclear weapon and we don't have to go to war. Great, let's do it. I'm all for diplomacy. I want diplomacy here. I want to talk to these countries. The United States has no reason to be enemies with Iran, actually. Besides what the media will tell you, the only reason we're enemies with Iran is because of Israel. And that gets to my point. If Trump was to make a deal with Iran that's beneficial for Iran and beneficial for America, if it was in America's interest to make a deal and not go to war, we still have this third party that is Israel, that is rogue, that is independent, that operates outside of U.S. interests whenever they feel like it. We have this third party, Israel, that is hell-bent on going to war and will do anything to go to war. So what we saw in June was that they did an offensive strike, a preliminary strike on Iran in the middle of negotiations. We very possibly could see this again. Netanyahu himself, just a couple days ago, threatened this. He said, if America makes a deal with Iran that does not address ballistic missiles and does not address the proxies which Iran controls, if the U.S. makes a deal that does not address those two things, then Israel will consider taking matters into their own hands and striking the ballistic missile facilities and striking the proxies, and who knows, maybe a regime change effort in Iran. If the regime is economically weakened, which they are, then Israel has been waiting for this moment for decades where they think the time is right to go forward with a regime change in Iran. This is what they are saying. Netanyahu literally said this. Look it up. He said this a couple days ago, that if the United States makes a deal solely on nuclear capabilities and doesn't address missiles and doesn't address the proxies, then they will take matters into their own hands. And this was the original position of the United States as well, by the way. Israel's position on Iran. In order to make a deal with Iran, which Netanyahu says cannot be trusted, in order to make a deal, Israel would like it to address not only the nuclear, which they, again, see as step one to a broader regime change effort, they also want to address the ballistic missile capability. They want to cut off the supply of ballistic missiles to Iran, and they want to make it so that the ballistic missiles they do have do not have the capability to hit Israel. That's number two. And they also want to force Iran to cut its ties with the proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, all these other groups. This is what Israel's demands are. And this originally was also the United States' demands. But the United States, being somewhat realistic here, realized, as Iran was saying themselves, we'll get into it here in a second, Iran has been saying that the ballistic missiles is off the table, proxies are off the table. We are not going to negotiate those. Because as you have to do here, as John Mearsheimer coined, you need to have strategic empathy here when we're in diplomacy. We can't be this bombastic, reckless, unless we're going to go to war. But if we're looking to actually avoid a war here, which is the point of diplomacy, we have to be strategically empathetic and put ourselves in the shoes of Iran and say, well, if we made a deal that actually, number one, cut off our nuclear capabilities, but also cut off our ballistic missile capabilities and cut off our proxy support, well, that makes Iran a sitting duck, and with a couple more months or years of economic sanctions and pressure against the Iranian regime, then the regime is just sitting there waiting to be overthrown by either some sort of coup attempt or an Israeli or American-backed regime change operation. So if you're Iran, this is utterly unacceptable. You cannot make a deal on all these things at once, because then that sets you up to be inevitably overthrown. So that's just unreasonable for Israel to be asking that. And the fact that Israel is asking for all this means, we don't even need this to prove it. We have all the years and years and years of decades and decades of their quotes saying this that proves Israel's main goal is regime change inevitably. So and Trump did back off of those first two. He said, we'll negotiate just on nuclear. We'll see what happens here. But this is as I was saying about Iran saying this was what Iran said just a couple of days ago about their missile capabilities. This is from the Times of Israel. It says, quote, Iran's missile capabilities are its red line and are not subject to be negotiated, an advisor to Iran's supreme leader said as Tehran and Washington eye a new round of talks to avert conflict. U.S. and Iranian diplomats held indirect talks last week in Oman amid a regional naval buildup by the U.S. threatening Iran. Quote, the Islamic Republic's missile capabilities are non-negotiable, Ali Shamkhani said, according to state media, while appearing in a march commemorating the 47th anniversary of the Islamic Republic. Washington has long sought to extend talks on Iran's nuclear capabilities to cover its missile program as well. Iran has said that it's prepared to discuss curbs on its nuclear program in return for lifting of sanctions, but has repeatedly ruled out linking the issue to other questions, including missiles. So, this is the situation here. In order for negotiations to really go forward, the United States and Iran are going to probably have to deal solely on the nuclear question, which, again, as I said earlier, that is in the interests of America, and that is in the interests of Iran. If we can make a deal here on solely nuclear, I'm all for it. I want that. That is my dream scenario here. Because no, I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, and no, I don't want a war with Iran. So if we can make a deal, which seemingly the Trump guys are willing to do and seemingly the Iranians are willing to do, let's do it. But that is forgetting that Israel here has completely different goals. Because at this meeting on Wednesday with Trump and Netanyahu in the White House, Netanyahu is trying to pressure Trump. This is according to reports. Netanyahu is trying to pressure Trump that Iran is building up his ballistic missiles and they're building up their nuclear capabilities. Netanyahu wants a war because he knows he's a smart guy. He knows that they're not willing to deal on all these missiles and the proxies like he's demanding. So he knows if that becomes the United States red line, then we're at war. Because if the United States actually has their red line be ballistic missiles and proxies and nuclear, then we're at war because there's no negotiating with that if you're Iran. So Netanyahu, knowing that, is trying to pin the United States into a position where the only option then becomes war, where war becomes the inevitable conclusion of these negotiation stances. Now, as we speak here, who knows? It seems as if talks are stalling. I don't know, but this is all the signals we're getting. We had the Associated Press, I'll just read this. This is their reporting on it. The U.S. sent a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East just today. Here is the Associated Press reporting on this. It says, quote, the United States will send the world's largest aircraft carrier to the Middle East to back up another already there, a person familiar with the plans said Friday, putting more American firepower behind President Trump's efforts to coerce Iran into a deal over its nuclear program. The USS Gerald R. Ford's planned deployment in the Middle East comes after Trump only days earlier suggested another round of talks with the Iranians was at hand. those negotiations didn't materialize as one of Tehran's top security officials visited Oman and Qatar this week and exchanged messages with the U.S. intermediaries. Already, Gulf Arab nations have warned any attack could spiral into another regional conflict in a Mideast still reeling from the Israel-Hamas war in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, Iranians are beginning to hold 40-day mourning ceremonies for the thousands killed in Tehran's bloody crackdown on nationwide protests last month, adding to the internal pressure faced by the sanctions-battered Islamic Republic. I will just point out, it says there at the end, it talks about the protests in Iran that happened about a month ago. You'll recall a couple episodes back, if you keep up with the episodes, that I just threw out a wild guess that amidst the unrest in Iran, the United States and Israel were likely doing some sort of funding and arming of the resistance in Iran, because they looked very professional. They were all dressed up. They were decked out in their gear. They had their AK-47s. They were taking over government buildings. It did not seem like a natural uprising. It seems like a textbook U.S. CIA Mossad coup attempt. And we just got reports yesterday from the Wall Street Journal that says that, yes, in fact, Starlink technology was being smuggled into the country through Iraq, and literally, as I said in that video, through Iraqi Kurdistan into Iranian Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan being in Iraq, where the U.S. military has a heavy presence in right now, through Iraqi Kurdistan into Iranian Kurdistan, which spans across the Iraq-Iran border. They were smuggling in Starlink technology to keep the protesters on the internet amid the internet blackout. Completely vindicated, completely correct, and that should tell you a little bit about those protests, because what anyone really who knows anything was saying from the beginning, anyone who pays attention to Middle East operations at all, acknowledges that this did not seem like a natural uprising. This seemed like a textbook Syria-style coup attempt backed by the CIA and by the Mossad, and that at this point is completely vindicated. But we'll get back here to the main point here, which is the Iran buildup here. We do have another, as we've had for the past month and a half, really. We've had a very big military buildup in Iran, in the Middle East, by the United States. We have another major aircraft carrier, a bunch of military assets headed to the region. And this comes the days after that Netanyahu meeting. So I don't know what actually went down at that meeting. None of us know besides the people who are in the meeting. But if there were reports coming out before the meeting started that Netanyahu was going to bring Trump the intelligence that showed Iran was on the verge of a nuclear weapon. I mean, does anyone get tired of this like endless cycle of Israel just manipulating our political class and our foreign policy? Does anyone get sick of that? It's this endless cycle of everyone buying the Israeli propaganda, their intelligence information that proves Iran's on the brink. And this is what happened at the meeting, supposedly. Supposedly Netanyahu brought him the, for sure, information, the classified intel that said that Iran was on the brink of developing nuclear weapons, and their stockhold of ballistic missiles was growing at a rapid pace. So who knows what Trump was told in that meeting? Who knows what Netanyahu was able to convince him of? But as we speak, the USS Gerald R. Ford was moved from the coast of Venezuela to the Middle East. And this comes amidst the pressure. And it says here in the article as well, you do have the other people in the region. You have Saudi Arabia, you have Qatar, Oman, Turkey, Pakistan. You have these other countries that were also involved in negotiations on last Friday in Oman. You have these countries that have no interest in seeing a regional war. They've seen this, as it said in the article, you saw this with Israel-Hamas for the past 2 years almost. We saw this, or almost 3 years actually. We saw this with the war back in June, the 12-day war, Israel and Iran and the United States. It causes regional chaos, and this is not in the interest of the United States, for one, but also these Gulf countries, these other countries in the region, which are trying to branch out into other industries. Saudi Arabia is trying to branch out into technology, into tourism, and same with Qatar. These countries, which are trying to attract tourists, Saudi Arabia is very heavily pushing to try and become a tourism hub of the world, the tourism hub of the Middle East. That's not going to work if they have bombs flying over their head. So these countries have a very major incentive in seeing a calming of relations here and not seeing a regional war. That doesn't work good. That's not good for business. That's not good for business if the Houthis are activated in a regional war by by Iran, and the Houthis are launching missiles into the Saudi oil fields. That's not good for business for Saudi Arabia. So these countries have a major interest in seeing this calm down, and they are very actively, very heavily pressuring Trump right now to try and make a deal. They are, honestly, it's probably if not for them, we might be at war right now, because they were the ones back in January, just a month ago, that right at the last minute when Trump was really about to go to war, that called him up frantically and told him to not go to war and try and make a deal. And they were the ones just last week who were sitting in on the meeting and trying to help negotiate, broker some sort of deal between the two countries, because they know this could spiral out of control. They've seen the wars the past 20, 30 years. They know this could spiral out of control, and it's not good. And really the bottom line is that it's not good for business. That's the entire point of why they're trying to stop this. So that's where we'll probably leave it off for today. Those are all the latest updates on the situation. Of course, please subscribe down below so you are also always able to stay updated on all of this, because we're going to be covering this as it happens. If a war breaks out, be sure to come watch here, because we'll have all the coverage for you. That's where we'll end it off for today. Thanks so much for watching. Please, again, go down below and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Also, leave a like while you're down there as well. And if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify and giving all those a follow, I'd also greatly appreciate that. Have a good one.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.